The Great Pyramid of Giza was built as a tomb for the Pharaoh Khufu. That is the official position. It appears in textbooks, encyclopedias, and museum exhibits around the world. It has been the standard explanation for nearly 2 centuries. There is one problem with it. No body was ever found inside the Great Pyramid. No mummy. No sarcophagus contents. No canopic jars. No grave goods. No inscriptions on any interior surface, not a single hieroglyph anywhere in the structure. When Arab governor Abdullah al-Mamun forced his way into the king's chamber in 820 CE, becoming one of the first people to enter the interior in over 1,000 years, he found a single granite box with no lid. The box was empty. It has always been empty. Every other Egyptian royal tomb ever found, hundreds of them across 4,000 years of pharaonic history, contained inscriptions, objects, residue of burial, or the physical remains of the person interred. The Great Pyramid contains none of these things. We have been calling it a tomb for 200 years. The evidence has never supported that conclusion. The conventional explanation for the empty chamber is looting. The pyramid was robbed in antiquity, and whatever was there, the mummy, the treasure, the inscriptions, was taken. This explanation has several problems. The primary access to the king's chamber runs through the grand gallery and the ascending passage, a narrow corridor blocked by 3 massive granite plugs. Those granite plugs were still in place when al-Mamun tunneled through a different route in 820 CE. If looters had entered through the original passage before al-Mamun, they had resealed it behind them with multi-ton granite blocks. If they had not entered through the original passage, they had somehow entered and exited through solid stone. Neither explanation is satisfying. Additionally, the interior of the king's chamber contains 0 evidence of funerary use. Egyptian burial chambers, even when robbed, retain chemical traces of mummification materials, fabric residue, and the physical wear patterns associated with the placement and removal of a body and its associated objects. The king's chamber has been analyzed with modern techniques. There is no such residue. The coffer, the granite box described as Khufu's sarcophagus, is too wide to have been brought into the chamber after construction. It is wider than the passages leading to it. It was placed in the chamber during construction, before the chamber was sealed. That is not unusual for Egyptian tombs. What is unusual is that the coffer has no inscriptions. Every royal sarcophagus in Egyptian history carries the name and titles of the person it was built for. The coffer in the king's chamber is completely unmarked. The standard interpretation requires us to believe that Khufu built the most massive and precisely engineered structure in human history as his burial monument and then left it completely uninscribed, with an unlabeled box that may never have held his body. That Egyptians who covered every other surface of every other monument with text somehow produced their greatest construction without a single word. That requires explanation. The explanation has not been provided. The king's chamber measures approximately 10.5 meters by 5.2 meters, with a ceiling height of 5.8 meters. The walls, floor, and ceiling are constructed from Aswan red granite transported approximately 800 kilometers from the quarry at Aswan, upstream along the Nile. The coffer is also Aswan red granite. Its internal dimensions are precisely sized, approximately 2.28 meters long, 0.98 meters wide, and 1.05 meters deep. In the late 20th century, researchers began measuring the acoustic properties of the king's chamber. The coffer, when struck, produces a sustained tonal resonance. That resonance has been measured multiple times, by multiple researchers, with consistent results. The coffer resonates at 440 Hz. For context, 440 Hz is concert pitch. It is the internationally standardized frequency to which every instrument in a modern orchestra is tuned. It is the frequency of the musical note A4. It is the frequency that defines the entire modern Western harmonic system. The choice of 440 Hz as the global musical standard was adopted by the International Organization for Standardization in 1955. The coffer in the king's chamber has been resonating at 440 Hz for approximately 4,500 years. A 2024 paper published on ResearchGate examined the cavity resonance of the king's chamber as a whole, not just the coffer, but the entire enclosed space. The analysis found that the chamber's dimensions produce resonant amplification at frequencies consistent with long-standing observations about its unusual acoustic properties. The paper described the chamber as having the proportional characteristics of a tuned resonant cavity. Aswan granite, the material used to construct both the chamber and the coffer, contains approximately 55% quartz by composition. Quartz is piezoelectric. When subjected to mechanical pressure or vibration, it generates an electrical charge. When an electrical charge is applied to it, it vibrates at a precise, stable frequency. This property is why quartz is used in every modern timepiece, in oscillators, in signal processing equipment, and in radio communications. The King's Chamber is a room-sized enclosure, built from a piezoelectric material, with precise resonant properties, containing a stone vessel that vibrates at concert pitch. This is not what tomb construction looks like. This is what something else looks like. The anomalies in the Great Pyramid are not confined to the King's Chamber. The Grand Gallery is the corbelled passage that rises at a 26-degree angle from the lower passage system to the antechamber preceding the King's Chamber. It is 47 meters long, 8.6 meters tall, and approximately 2 meters wide at the floor, with walls that step inward in 7 corbelling stages as they rise, narrowing to a ceiling width of roughly 1 meter. These proportions have been examined by engineers and acoustic researchers who identified a significant structural characteristic. The Grand Gallery matches the dimensional ratios of a Helmholtz resonator. A Helmholtz resonator is a specific architectural form, a large enclosed volume connected to a smaller opening or passage that produces resonant amplification of specific sound frequencies. It is named after the 19th century physicist Hermann von Helmholtz, who formalized the mathematics of cavity resonance. The principle is behind the deep resonance of a bottle when you blow across its opening, scaled up to architectural dimensions. The Grand Gallery, with its wide base narrowing to a much smaller ceiling opening and connected to the passage system at specific geometric ratios, produces exactly the resonant amplification characteristics a Helmholtz resonator would produce. The geometry is not approximate. The proportions are precise enough that the match has been documented in multiple independent engineering analyses. Above the King's Chamber, engineers in the 19th century discovered a series of 5 additional chambers stacked vertically above the ceiling, called relieving chambers or stress relief chambers. The official explanation is that they were built to distribute the weight of the pyramid above the King's Chamber, preventing the ceiling from collapsing. Structural engineers have consistently noted that this explanation is technically unnecessary. The corbelled arch design of the King's Chamber ceiling is already sufficient to handle the load without the additional chambers. The relieving chambers add weight above the chamber rather than relieving pressure on it. Their actual mechanical purpose remains unexplained. In 1994, Robert Bauval and Adrian Gilbert published a paper in the journal Nature documenting something that had gone unremarked in mainstream Egyptology for decades. The 3 pyramids at Giza, the Great Pyramid, Khufu's Pyramid, and Menkaur's Pyramid, are not perfectly aligned with each other. They are slightly offset. Specifically, Menkaur's pyramid is shifted slightly to the east of the line connecting the other 2. This offset matches precisely the configuration of the 3 stars of Orion's belt Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka as they appeared in the Egyptian sky in approximately 10,500 BCE. Not 2,500 BCE, when the pyramids were constructed. Not at any time near the conventional construction date. The ground plan of the Giza Plateau matches the sky plan of Orion's belt as it appeared 8,000 years before the pyramids were built. Bauval described this as an intentional star map, not of the contemporary sky but of an earlier epoch, encoded in the ground plan of the plateau. The pyramids also contain shafts extending from both the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, rising at angles through the body of the pyramid toward its exterior faces. When the angles of these shafts are mapped against the sky, they align with specific stars. The southern shaft of the King's Chamber points to Orion's belt at its lower culmination. The northern shaft points to the star Thuban, the pole star at the time of the pyramid's construction. The southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber points to Sirius, the brightest star in the sky and the star associated in Egyptian religion with the goddess Isis. These are not approximate alignments that could be attributed to chance. The angular precision required to produce these alignments through several hundred meters of solid stone is on the order of fractions of a degree. The builders knew where these stars were. They built targeting systems for them. The conventional explanation that these shafts are air vents providing ventilation for workers has a fundamental problem. The Queen's chamber shafts are sealed at both ends. They do not connect to the exterior. They do not connect to the Queen's chamber. They serve no ventilation function. They were sealed shut from the moment of construction. Air vents that are sealed at both ends are not air vents. The documented anomalies in the Great Pyramid form a coherent list. No body, no inscriptions, no funerary residue in the structure's interior. A coffer placed during construction, unlabeled and permanently empty. Interior walls bare of text in a culture that inscribed every other surface of every other monument. A central chamber built from piezoelectric granite. A coffer resonating at 440 Hz. A passage system with the proportional characteristics of a Helmholtz resonator. 5 additional chambers above the King's chamber whose structural function engineers cannot account for. Star shafts cut through hundreds of meters of stone at angular precision fractions of a degree from perfect alignment, pointing to specific significant stars, with 2 of those shafts sealed at both ends. A ground plan on the Giza Plateau that matches the configuration of Orion's belt not in 2500 BCE but in 10,500 BCE. The mainstream interpretation requires all of these to be coincidental or incidental features of a very elaborate royal tomb, a tomb that contains no royal burial. What is the alternative interpretation? The honest alternative is that we do not yet have the correct understanding of what the Great Pyramid was built for. That is not fringe speculation. That is the application of basic evidential reasoning. When the physical evidence consistently fails to support the standard explanation, the standard explanation requires revision. Egyptian archaeology as a discipline has significant institutional inertia around the tomb hypothesis. It was proposed before most of the anomalous data was collected. It has been assumed rather than demonstrated for 200 years. The physical evidence, the acoustic properties, the astronomical alignments, the geometric precision, the absence of any funerary evidence whatsoever points toward a structure built with purposes that the tomb hypothesis does not explain. What those purposes were remains genuinely open. Acoustic resonator. Astronomical monument. Something else entirely. The honest answer is that we do not know. But the tomb hypothesis is not supported by the evidence. The most famous building in human history may be fundamentally misidentified. And in 200 years of Egyptology, that question has never been seriously asked at scale. Next week, we go to Bolivia. 12,800 feet above sea level. A site containing stone blocks with tolerances measured in fractions of a millimeter, precision that would challenge a modern CNC machine. And a 2022 chemical analysis that found organic material inside the stone itself, material that shouldn't be there, that may prove these blocks were not carved at all. They were cast. Like concrete. If that's true, everything we think we know about when this site was built is wrong. Subscribe. The next one is the one that changes the timeline. ## production notes. Voice Brian, 11 Labs NPCZCJZI2 Dev NBZ1 ZQRB. Key sources to cite in description: Bovell and Gilbert Nature 1994 Orion Correlation, ResearchGate Cavity Resonance Paper 2024, Standard Egyptology Sources for Basic Measurements, Acoustic Archaeology Research on King's Chamber. Do not frame as ancient aliens or supernatural, frame as documented anomalies that the tomb hypothesis cannot explain. Emphasize, we're asking what it was for, not who built it. The engineering question, not the civilization question. ## SEO tags. Great Pyramid Tomb Theory wrong, King's Chamber 440 Hz, Pyramid Acoustic Resonance, Orion Correlation Giza, Bovell Pyramid Nature Journal, Pyramid Star Shafts, Aswan Granite Piezoelectric, Grand Gallery Helmholtz Resonator, Great Pyramid Mystery, Khufu Tomb Evidence, Pyramid No Body Found, Ancient Egyptian Engineering, Great Pyramid Purpose, Corbel Chambers Pyramid, Pyramid Anomalies Explained.